and no major theater chain has shown an X-rated movie. The pornographers own that franchise. They show their movies in adult theaters or on video cassette. The next milder rating after X, of course, is R, which carries the restriction that people under 17 must be accompanied by a parent or adult guardian. Now, on this special program, we are suggesting that a new rating, an A rating for adults only, be added to the code. Added between the R and the X, not to replace the X, which would still be for pornographic pictures, but to give a new rating for pictures that don't qualify for the R and are not hardcore pornography. The current ratings controversy was inspired by The Showdown over Angel Heart, a new film directed by Alan Parker and starring Mickey Rourke as a detective looking for a missing person. And it also stars Lisa Bonet of The Cosby Show as the woman who holds the missing clues. Now, one of the movie's scenes shows Rourke and Bonet making love while rain drops from the ceiling, and then the rain turns to blood. This is the scene they're talking about, although we're going to cut out before the nudity.
Has just begun, 'cause now you set my soul on fire.
And then that scene builds in intensity as the passion of their lovemaking increases and the raindrops from the ceiling turn into a torrent of blood. Now, if you see the movie, you'll understand why the rain turns to blood. It's explained in the plot. It's based on the secret identities of both of those characters, and in terms of the plot, it makes sense. But the MPAA Code and Ratings Administration threatened this movie with an X rating, saying that scene was too intense and it had to be toned down. Well, eventually they did take out 10 seconds to get the R rating. I saw, and Gene did too, the original uncut version of the movie. I didn't think it deserved an X rating. It looked clearly like an R picture to me. But more to the point of this program, I thought the director should have had the right to edit the movie the way he wanted to without worrying about the rating. Now, since the X rating is a total kiss of death, that was not possible. In today's Hollywood, it's an R rating or else.
And let's explain why it's a kiss of death. This film opened in about 1,000 theaters, and it wouldn't have opened in anywhere near that amount if it had come out with an X rating. In fact, it might not have opened any at all. Before we can talk about any changes we might want to see in the movie rating system, though, I think a little history is in order. In the golden days of Hollywood, sex and violence and language were strictly controlled by a studio-supported code, the Hays Code. In the 60s, however, with the death of the grand old men of Hollywood and the growth of independent producers and changing values in society, individual filmmakers started to test those limits on sex and violence and language. Fearing government censorship, the film companies decided in November '68 to establish a new code, a rating code with the original letters. You have to go way back now in history to remember these: G, M for mature, R, and X. X was probably a bad choice, as it turned out, as porno filmmakers, as Roger mentioned, quickly began adapting it, claiming that their films, remember those ads? Triple X, presumably 3 times as dirty. But X originally was intended to mean that adults only should attend. And one of the very first films that was rated X and was released by a major film company was the Oscar-winning Best Picture of 1969, Midnight Cowboy. Here, in a scene typical of the new frankness in American movies back then, John Voight, as a male hooker with a heart of gold, gets violent with a would-be client, Barnard Hughes.
Here, don't even thank me.
I gotta have more than 10. I gotta have $57.
I simply don't have it, Joe.
I got family, damn it.
You're wasting your time, Joe. There's nothing in here.
Get out of my way, please, sir. Get out of my way!
No.
Don't let go of that table, please. No, you. Please, sir.
No, please. No. No. Oh, I deserve that.
It's a very powerful scene, and it simply wouldn't have been made in the old days of Hollywood in the 30s and 40s. They just would have cut away from that stuff at all if they would have touched the subject. And the X rating back in 1969 served notice to film goers that here was a film that contained subject material and visuals that were best suited for adults. People went to Midnight Cowboy, they were eager to see it, they knew it was an adventure, and they knew, hey, this could be rough, but I want to see it. Now, times would change. Midnight Cowboy, many years later, would be re-rated R. But at the time, the X rating seemed appropriate. 3 years after Midnight Cowboy came out, 1972, the very same film company, United Artists, the most progressive major distributor at the time, took another risk by releasing an X rating of one of the greatest films of all time, Last Tango in Paris, with Marlon Brando playing the grieving husband of a woman who committed suicide. Here he meets a young girl and he tries to recapture the passionate innocence of his youth. But eventually they both start to shrink back from the intimacy and begin sparring with each other. In this scene, she talks about her young boyfriend who frightens her.
Even he frightened me.
What is he, your local pimp?
He could be. He looks it. You know what, I'm in love with him?
I can't wait.
Because you know how to make me fall in love with him.
Ah, you want this man that you love to protect you and take care of you, huh?
Yeah.
You want this golden, shining, powerful warrior to build your fortress where you can hide in. So you don't have to you don't ever have to be afraid, or you don't have to feel lonely. You never have to feel empty. That's what you want, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, you'll never find him.
And for those of us who've seen the film, we know that the sex and the violence, and most important, the emotion of that film gets much more intense. As with Midnight Cowboy, I believe a majority of people found the X rating on Last Tango in Paris to be entirely appropriate. Indeed, it could be argued that the existence of the X rating back then allowed the film to be released in this country in its purest form, the way the director, Bernardo Bertolucci, wanted it to be made. Unfortunately, as the years wore on, as the makers of explicit sex films exploited the X with the triple X and all that stuff, major film companies shied away from the X rating, believed it tainted a film with a dirty label. And as some of these film companies were bought by bigger film companies, none of them wanted their shareholders to say, you're releasing dirty movies. Also going on at the same time, nervous Nelly theater owners refused to book X-rated films. And frankly, some prudish newspapers and TV and radio stations began refusing to run ads for X-rated movies. The result? A combination of forces that has turned the X rating from something valuable into something dreaded. Film companies want nothing hotter than an R because an X rating limits their ability to make money. Who destroyed their X rating? A lot of faint-hearted people, from film companies to newspapers to theater owners. In my opinion, it's too bad. The X could have been a badge of distinction. Instead, it's become a badge of seediness.
And you mentioned that Midnight Cowboy was eventually rated R. Well, of course, 10 years after Last Tango in Paris came out, it went to the rating board again and again was rated X. Now, that's proof, I think, that in today's climate, or any time during the last decade, Last Tango in Paris, one of the 5 or 6 best movies I've ever seen in my life, could not have been released in America because of the MPAA code. We wouldn't have seen it. We couldn't have seen it.
Cuts would have had to have been made. It would have been less of a movie.
Would have been destroyed. Think of the cuts that would have had to be made. Half of the movie, practically. When we come back, we'll look at some recent movies, serious movies by important directors that were threatened with the X rating. On this show may be objectionable to some viewers. On this special edition of our program, we're looking at the enormous gap between Hollywood's R and X ratings. A gap so wide that no major Hollywood studio will release an X-rated movie, and that means there's no longer such a thing in America as a respectable adults-only movie. It means that a lot of movies have had to be re-edited to qualify for the R rating, and we're going to look at some of those now. Let's start with a 1984 film featuring one of the biggest stars in America today, Kathleen Turner, a wonderful actress in a brilliant performance in the psychological thriller Crimes of Passion. Turner plays a fashion designer by day who is a prostitute by night and who will provide any fantasy for any man. This is part of a scene now involving a masochistic policeman, a scene that had to be cut in order to get the film an R rating. Now, that scene goes on, and it's pretty rough, but it's not pornographic. It makes a serious point about the personalities of those people and about the situation that they're in. It's a good movie. About a year ago, another movie was threatened with the X rating, and that was 9½ Weeks, which also starred Mickey Rourke, the star of Angel Heart. He played a strange man and entered into a stranger relationship with a woman played by Kim Basinger, and eventually she decided that his tastes were too degrading for her to go along with. 9½ Weeks lost 2 minutes in order to qualify for the R rating, including all of this scene.
Get on all fours and crawl. Elizabeth, I don't want to argue with you. No. Now crawl.
John, don't play with me like that.
Elizabeth, I don't want to negotiate with you. Now crawl.
John, it's only a game.
Crawl.
No! Don't touch me!
That scene is important in terms of the whole structure of the movie because the time comes in this film when the Basinger character says, I want out, I won't go any further, this is sick. And that is, of course, the liberating message of the film. That scene, which would have helped to make that point, is gone. The movie's director, Adrian Lyne, had no choice. Cut the movie or don't get the R rating. Nobody thought the movie was porno, nobody thought it was hardcore, and yet it would have gotten the X, which would have meant unreleasable. Another case where an A rating would have made everyone happy.
Roger, you just made a very good point about cuts in X-rated movies that hurt them when they become R-rated and they're not as good a film. Do you know what you gave Crimes of Passion, which you just called a good film? Do you know what you gave that back in 1984 when it originally came out?
You tell me.
You gave it 1.5 stars. I looked it up in your little book, The Movie Home Companion.
Great big book. Thank you.
Okay. But look at the difference. And do you know what? I didn't give it a good review either. And when I saw this film, I went, uh-oh.
I think you'll find if you look at that review that what I talked about was the fact that the payoffs to some of the scenes are missing. Something
yes, but
that
1.5 stars. Okay, I'm not getting into that. I'm telling you that there's a hell of a lot of a difference between 1.5 stars, which is a negative review, and a good movie. And I think it's a good movie too, and I made the same mistake.
Okay,
and that means that those cuts hurt this film because we as critics couldn't recommend it.
That's a very good point, because when we both looked at this film again on video cassette,
it's a good film.
A lot better when it's made the way that Ken Russell made it. Coming up next, we'll look at a dumb double standard in the way movies are rated today.
Let's get high.
System. Roger and I not long ago reviewed a pretty rough thriller named Nightmare on Elm Street 3, a violent mad slasher movie that throws in a sex scene out of the blue as a young boy is teased and then tied up by a devil masquerading as a nurse.
What's wrong, Joey? Feeling tongue-tied?
That is rough stuff. Now, there was absolutely no controversy about the rating of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. It received an R rating probably out of hand. It may be raunchy, but that's the way most teenage horror films are, and the raters went right along with that. The same holds true in a way, though, for the more classy thriller, 52 Pickup, which contains this extraordinarily brutal scene involving the videotaping of the murder of a woman by her kidnappers.
Okay, suspense time is over.
Now, when you watch a scene like that, you're saying, hey, if there is an X rating that does exist, that's the kind of scene, that's the kind of picture that probably belongs in it, but they're not putting stuff in the X category. And so we end up now with what seems to be a double standard with the rating code members, and that is, my suspicion, and Roger's too, because he said it not too long ago, is that they're easy on films with low aspirations, but they're hard as nails on a film that is made with passion and intelligence and just happens to be about the psychosexual world. I'm thinking about such films as a fine filmmaker's film, Nicholas Roeg's Bad Timing, A Sensual Obsession, or more recently, the film we were just talking about a segment ago, Ken Russell's Crimes of Passion with Kathleen Turner. The point to be made here is that there is a double standard between the cheap exploitation film or the genre action film and the serious-minded adult entertainment. One gets an R, the other has to fight for an R.
When we come back, we'll give our suggestions for an overhaul and updating of the rating system to restore the freedom of choice that the system was originally designed to protect. It copyrighted all of the ratings from G through R, but they didn't copyright the X. They didn't want to touch that. As a result, anybody is perfectly free to give their own picture an X rating. I could take home videos and rate them X and show them on the corner store if I wanted to, and the pornographers soon discovered that the words rated X looked real good on a theater marquee. As a result, the X became completely identified, as we've said, in the public mind with pornography, and it became worthless to Hollywood. The Hollywood Code no longer had a practical, usable category that meant adults only. Here's the way the system works today. The G rating means the movie is suitable for children no matter how young, children of any age, movies like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The PG means children of all ages will be admitted, but parental guidance might be useful to younger kids. That would be a movie like Star Trek IV. PG-13 is a recent addition to the system, added in 1984 in response to parents who said action pictures like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom were too intense for smaller kids. It suggests caution for kids under 13. The R rating means that viewers under 17 cannot attend unless accompanied by a parent or adult guardian. Platoon qualifies in that category. And then there's the X rating for a movie like Debbie Does Dallas. In the days of Midnight Cowboy, the X meant adults only. Today it means only one thing: hardcore pornography. So isn't it time for the movie industry to face reality and create a new rating for those movies that are not suitable for kids under 17, but which are also not hardcore? Isn't it time for an A rating for adults only that would give directors a reasonable alternative to the X rating, which has become a poisoned mark of shame?
And Roger, the letter A is a perfect choice, because I can assure you that the pornographers will not start advertising their films as AAA. That sounds like the American Automobile Association, and also A is a letter full of goodness. They will still stick with the XXX because that sounds downright and dirty.
Well, but you've made an important point here, which is that in adding the A rating, we don't take away the X rating.
Right.
I have an article here from Daily Variety in which Richard Hefner, the chairman of the MPAA Code and Ratings Administration, says he has no problem with the proposal that there be an A rating. But then when you turn to page 31, where it's continued, he says, one might say that an A would be just as bad as an X because a lot of pornos call themselves adult films. Because the difference is they'd have the A rating copyrighted, or they could control who they gave it to, and they could say, A is for adults-only films. The X starts when you have gynecological detail with no redeeming social merit, and that's how they could find that dividing line. And then we would have a usable A category.
Okay. I'd just like to lay out one more point, and that is that the ratings board people claim that they are not censors, that they just make suggestions. If the filmmakers want an R rating, then they will have to make cuts. But they don't force them to make those cuts, and that is technically true. But the fact is, with the circle of fear comprised by nervous theater owners, nervous newspaper publishers, nervous TV station and radio owners, and a nervous film industry, movies are being edited to conform to an R rating, and that is de facto censorship. And also I want to point out that the R rating is a rating that we all know is very loosely enforced, which means that because of this whole screwed up system, you got a lot of kids going in to see on their own pictures that are pretty rough. My notion, substitute the A rating, as Roger said, make it an A rating. But if, and only if, and this is my contribution, everyone involved in the movie game will agree not to ban A-rated movies from movie theaters, from newspaper and TV ads. We've all got to work together on this. Movies with an adult sensibility are nothing to be ashamed of. In these days of so many teenage films, adult films are not to be scorned. They're to be encouraged, and they are to be cherished.
That's a very good point. And the whole point really, if we had a bottom line of this entire show, is there are things that should be for adults only. Not just pornography, not just hardcore, maybe not even just sex, but things that are for people over 17 and not appropriate for people under 17. It seems to me like common sense.
Well, that's the way we felt a couple of months ago, and since then our words have had absolutely no effect whatsoever. The Motion Picture Association has made no changes, and they're still in error. They are still censoring movies. I think I know why. They've made one PG-13 change a couple of years ago. They think that's enough. They don't want to start changing every year.
Jack Valini said he hasn't received any letters from people requesting an A rating. But why should he? Because parents think that allegedly their kids can't even see R movies, much less X movies, which the A rating would come in between. So I would think that they would make the change because it's right.
That's
because it's the right thing to do for the MPAA, if they love movies, to give directors the chance to make a movie the way they want to. And just this summer, a movie is out called RoboCop that has been changed in just the way we're talking about it. In this scene we're looking at right now, this prototype robot comes into the room and starts shooting at a victim. And in the original cut, he shot and shot and shot. But this scene ends as you'll see it now.
Somebody want to call a paramedic?
And in the original cut, that went on much longer, making what the producer thought was the satirical, comedic point. But no, the MPAA said, that's an X rating, too violent. And so they had to cut it down to the way you see it now. That's another example of the MPAA getting into the act and using that R rating as a threat in order to get people to make movies the way they want them to.
Yep, that's it. That's censorship, and that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be back with a look at another controversy in the movie industry, an updated look at the issue of colorization. That's next week. And until then, the balcony is closed.